The dust settled around Jake O'Brien's worn boots as he counted the last silver dollar in his palm, knowing full well it was all that stood between him and starvation in Reno, Nevada, this scorching summer of 1878. He had been standing outside the general store for the better part of an hour, trying to decide whether to spend his final coin on bread or ammunition, when he noticed her huddled against the building across the dirt road. She was young, maybe 18 or 19, with matted brown hair falling around hollow cheeks and eyes that had seen too much suffering for someone so tender in years. Her dress, if it could still be called that, hung in tatters from her thin frame, and her bare feet were caked with mud and blood from walking the unforgiving streets. Jake had seen plenty of misery in his 25 years. He had watched his parents die of fever when he was barely 14, had worked himself half to death on cattle drives from Texas to Montana, had gone days without food more times than he cared to remember. But something about this girl struck him differently. Maybe it was the way she tried to make herself small, invisible, as if apologizing for taking up space in the world. Maybe it was the quiet dignity in how she sat, back straight despite her obvious weakness, refusing to beg even as her body clearly begged for sustenance. He crossed the street without thinking, his decision made before his mind caught up with his feet. The girl's eyes widened with fear as his shadow fell across her, and she pressed herself harder against the wooden planks of the building. "Easy now," Jake said softly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect his mother had taught him long ago. "I do not mean you any harm, miss. I just thought you might be hungry." Her eyes, he noticed, were a striking shade of green like the prairie grass after spring rain. They flickered to his face, then away as if she did not trust what she saw there. "I have this," Jake continued, holding out the silver dollar. The coin caught the afternoon sun, gleaming with promise. "It is not much, but it will buy you a meal and maybe a place to sleep tonight." The girl stared at the money as if it were a rattlesnake about to strike. "Why?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse or thirst or both. "Because I have been where you are," Jake answered truthfully. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing, and I have been waiting for the chance to pass that kindness along." He placed the dollar on the wooden walkway beside her and stepped back, giving her space. For a long moment she did not move, just stared at the coin as if it might vanish like a desert mirage. Then, slowly, her trembling fingers reached out and closed around it. "Thank you," she breathed, and tears began streaming down her dirt-stained cheeks. "You do not understand what this means." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of his empty pocket but also a strange lightness in his chest. "What is your name, Miss Theresa?" she said quietly. "Theresa Cole." "Well, Miss Cole, I am Jake O'Brien. I work at the Silver Creek Ranch about 5 miles west of town. If you ever need anything, you can find me there." He replaced his hat and touched the brim in farewell. "You take care of yourself now." As he walked away, Jake wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life or the best decision. His stomach was already growling, and he had no idea how he would eat that night or the next. But when he glanced back and saw Theresa clutching that dollar like a lifeline, standing on shaking legs to make her way toward the general store, he knew he had done the right thing. The next few weeks were harder than Jake wanted to admit. He survived on the ranch by trading extra work for meals, mucking out stables and mending fences long after the other hands had turned in for the night. His boss, a gruff but fair man named Samuel Hart, noticed his extra effort and eventually asked what had driven him to such dedication. "Just trying to earn my keep," Jake had replied, which was true enough. Samuel had studied him with knowing eyes. "Heard you gave your last dollar to some homeless girl in town. That true?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "News travels fast. In a town like Reno, everything travels fast. Samuel pulled out his tobacco pouch and offered it to Jake, who declined. That was a fool thing to do, boy. Noble but foolish. Maybe so, Jake agreed, but I would do it again. Samuel had laughed at that, a sound like gravel in a tin can. You are either the best kind of man or the worst kind of fool. Time will tell which. But the next day, Jake found his wages had been raised by $2 a week, and Samuel never mentioned it again. Jake thought about Theresa often in those early days, wondering if she had found shelter, if she had eaten, if she was safe. Reno was not a gentle town, especially not for a young woman alone. The mining boom had brought all sorts to Nevada, and not all of them had honorable intentions. He kept his eyes open whenever he rode into town for supplies, but he never saw her again. Summer turned to fall, and fall gave way to winter. The work on the ranch continued, endless and demanding. Jake rose before dawn and fell into bed long after dark, his hands rough and his back aching but his conscience clear. He saved what money he could, learned everything Samuel would teach him about ranching and horses and reading the weather in the sky. Winter turned to spring, and spring cycled back to summer. 3 years passed in this way, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythm of ranch life. Jake turned 28, though he felt older. The work had hardened his body and weathered his face, but it had also given him a sense of purpose he had never known before. Samuel began talking about retirement, hinting that Jake might have a future as foreman if he continued on his current path. It was a hot afternoon in July of 1881 when everything changed. Jake had ridden into Reno to pick up supplies and mail for the ranch. The town had grown in the 3 years since he had last really looked at it. More buildings lined the main street, more people crowded the walkways. The railroad had finally pushed through, bringing even more commerce and chaos to the dusty Nevada town. He had just loaded the wagon with flour and salt and coffee when he heard the commotion. A crowd had gathered near the church at the end of the street, people craning their necks to see something Jake could not make out. Curious despite himself, he secured the wagon and walked over to investigate. The crowd parted as he approached, and that was when he saw her. A young woman stood in front of the church in a wedding dress, the white fabric brilliant against the brown and gray of the town. The dress was beautiful, clearly expensive, with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves. But it was not the dress that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. It was the woman wearing it. She had changed. Her face had filled out, no longer hollow with hunger. Her hair, clean and brushed, fell in shining waves past her shoulders. She stood tall and confident, nothing like the broken girl he had found huddled against a building 3 years ago. But those eyes, those green eyes like prairie grass after rain, those he would have recognized anywhere. "Theresa," he whispered, though the crowd's murmuring drowned out his voice. She was scanning the faces in the crowd, clearly searching for someone. Her expression was anxious, almost desperate, and Jake felt a strange twisting in his chest. Of course she was looking for someone. She was wearing a wedding dress. She was getting married. The realization hit him harder than he expected. Then her eyes found his, and her whole face transformed. Relief, joy, and something else he could not name flooded her features. She lifted her skirts and ran toward him, propriety forgotten, and the crowd gasped and whispered louder. "Jake O'Brien," she said when she reached him, slightly breathless. "I have been looking everywhere for you." Up close, she was even more transformed than he had first thought. This was not just a girl who had eaten a few good meals. This was a woman who had found her place in the world, who had grown into herself. She was beautiful, and Jake felt suddenly very aware of his dusty clothes and sun-darkened skin. "Miss Cole," he managed, confused and overwhelmed. "I do not understand. What are you doing here? What is all this? It is exactly what it looks like, Theresa said, a smile playing at her lips. I am here to get married if you will have me. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Jake stared at her, certain he had misheard. I am sorry, what? Theresa's smile faded slightly, replaced by uncertainty. Perhaps I should explain. Is there somewhere we could talk, somewhere less public? Jake nodded dumbly and led her away from the gawking crowd, toward a small bench outside the general store. They sat, and Jake waited, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. That day 3 years ago, Theresa began, her hand smoothing nervously over the white fabric of her dress. When you gave me your last dollar, you saved my life. I know that sounds dramatic, but it is the truth. I had not eaten in 4 days. I was so weak I could barely stand. Another day or two, and I would have died in that alley. Jake wanted to protest, to say she would have survived somehow, but the look in her eyes told him she was not exaggerating. I used the money to buy food and to rent a bed for the night at a boarding house on the edge of town, she continued. The woman who ran the place, Mrs. Patterson, she took pity on me. She let me stay on, gave me work cleaning and cooking in exchange for room and board. It was not much, but it was everything to me. I am glad, Jake said quietly. I worried about you. Theresa's expression softened. Did you? I wondered. I wanted to come find you to thank you, but I was so ashamed of how I must have looked, how I must have seemed. And I wanted to have something to offer you, some way to repay what you had given me. You did not owe me anything, Jake protested. But I did, Theresa insisted. You gave me hope when I had none. You reminded me that good people still existed in the world. That mattered more than the dollar, though I needed that too. She took a breath, gathering her thoughts. Mrs. Patterson had a brother who owned a dress shop in San Francisco. After 6 months, when I had proven myself reliable, she arranged for me to go work for him. It was terrifying, leaving the one safe place I had found, but it was also an opportunity I could not refuse. San Francisco, Jake repeated, trying to imagine this woman who had been so broken navigating a city that size. I worked in his shop for a year, learning the trade. I had a good eye for fabric and design, he said. And I worked harder than anyone else because I remembered what it felt like to have nothing. Theresa's voice grew stronger as she spoke. When he decided to open a second location, he made me the manager. Can you imagine? Me, who had been starving in the streets, managing an entire dress shop. You must have earned it, Jake said, and he meant it. The woman before him radiated competence and determination. I saved every penny I could spare, Theresa went on, and I invested in the business when Mr. Patterson offered me the chance. The shops did well, better than well. San Francisco was growing so fast and everyone needed clothes. Within 2 years, I owned a third of the business. Jake shook his head in amazement. That is incredible, Theresa. You should be proud. I am, she admitted. But the whole time through all of it, I kept thinking about you. The cowboy who gave away his last dollar to a stranger. I asked around when I could, sent letters to Reno trying to track you down. I learned you worked at Silver Creek Ranch. I learned you were a good man, reliable and honest. I learned you were not married. Her cheeks flushed slightly at this last part, and Jake felt his own face grow warm. I made this dress myself, Theresa said, looking down at the white fabric. It is the finest work I have ever done, and I brought it here to Reno because I needed you to know that I have not forgotten. That what you did mattered, that I became someone who could stand on her own 2 feet, and it started with your kindness. That is all you, Jake said firmly. I just gave you $1. You did everything else. You gave me more than $1, Theresa corrected. You gave me back my humanity when I felt like an animal. You looked at me and saw a person worth helping. Do you know how rare that is? Jake did not know what to say to that. He had never thought of his action as anything special, just basic human decency. But looking at Theresa now, seeing what she had become, he felt a swell of emotion he could not quite name. "But why the wedding dress?" he asked, still confused. "You said you were here to get married." Theresa met his eyes directly, and he saw both courage and vulnerability there. "Because I fell in love with you, Jake O'Brien. Not all at once, and not in any way that makes logical sense. But over these 3 years, as I built my life, you were always there in my thoughts. The man who cared about a stranger. The man who sacrificed his own comfort for someone else. I asked about you, learned your character, and everything I heard made me more certain." She reached out and took his hand, and Jake felt the calluses on her palms, evidence of her hard work. "I am not a silly girl with a romantic fantasy. I am a businesswoman who knows what she wants. And I want to know if there is any chance you might feel something for me too. If maybe, possibly, you could see yourself building a life with someone like me." Jake's head was spinning. 3 years ago, he had given away his last dollar without a second thought. He had never imagined it would lead to this moment, to this extraordinary woman in a wedding dress asking him if he could love her. He thought about those 3 years, about the quiet loneliness of ranch life, about coming back to an empty bunk every night. He thought about the few times he had considered courting someone in town, but how nothing had ever felt quite right. He thought about the memory of a green-eyed girl that had stayed with him longer than it probably should have. "I do not know if I love you," he said slowly, honestly. "But I would very much like the chance to find out." Theresa's smile could have outshone the Nevada sun. "That is all I ask." They talked for hours after that, sitting on that bench while the town went about its business around them. Theresa told him more about her time in San Francisco, about the friends she had made and the life she had built. She told him about the small apartment above the dress shop where she lived, about her love for the fog that rolled in from the bay and the sound of the ship's horns in the harbor. Jake told her about the ranch, about Samuel's mentorship, and the satisfaction of working with horses. He told her about the long Nevada winters and the spring roundups, about sleeping under more stars than anyone could count and waking to see the sun paint the mountains gold. "I cannot leave the ranch permanently," Jake said as the afternoon shadows grew long. "It is in my blood now. The work, the land, all of it. Samuel is talking about selling me a stake in the operation, making me a partner. It is everything I have worked for." "I would not ask you to leave," Theresa assured him. "The dress shops mostly run themselves now. I have good managers, people I trust. I could come here, build a life in Reno. There must be women here who need dresses, who would pay for quality work. You would give up San Francisco?" Jake asked, surprised. "Everything you built there." "I would be expanding, not giving up," Theresa corrected. "And besides, what is the point of success if you have no one to share it with? I spent too long alone and desperate. I do not want to be alone anymore, even in a fine apartment with money in the bank." The honesty in her voice moved him. Jake found himself studying her face, the delicate curve of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in the set of her shoulders. She was extraordinary, this woman who had risen from nothing, and she wanted him. "How would this work?" he asked. "You cannot marry a man you barely know. That would be foolish, and you are not a foolish woman." "No, I am not," Theresa agreed. "So we court properly. I have rented a room at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson's place. I will stay in Reno and you will come visit me when you can. We will spend time together, get to know each other truly. And if, after a reasonable time, we both feel that this could work, then we will marry. If not, we will part as friends, and I will return to San Francisco with no regrets for having tried." It was a sensible plan, the kind of practical approach he would have expected from someone with her business acumen. But there was also something romantic about it, about this woman who had traveled from California in a wedding dress she had made herself, hoping for a chance at love with a man who had shown her a single kindness years ago. "When do we start?" Jake asked. Theresa's answering smile was radiant. "How about now? I have not eaten since breakfast, and I imagine you are hungry too. Would you do me the honor of sharing dinner with me, Mr. O'Brien?" Jake stood and offered his arm, feeling awkward but also strangely right. "It would be my pleasure, Miss Cole." They walked to the restaurant together, Theresa still in her wedding dress, and if the townsfolk stared and whispered, Jake found he did not much care. He was having dinner with a remarkable woman, and the future, for the first time in a long while, felt full of possibility. Over the next few months, Jake and Theresa's courtship became the talk of Reno. Every Sunday, Jake would ride into town after morning chores, clean and shaved as best he could manage, to spend the day with Theresa. They would walk through the streets, have lunch at the restaurant, sit on the bench outside the general store and talk for hours. Theresa had indeed opened a small dress shop in Reno, renting a space on the main street and quickly building a reputation for quality work. Women came from miles around for her designs, drawn by both the craftsmanship and the story of the homeless girl turned successful businesswoman. She hired 2 local women to help with the sewing, providing good jobs and fair wages, which only increased her popularity. Jake found himself fascinated by everything about her. The way her hands moved as she described a new design, the thoughtful expression she wore when solving a business problem, the gentle kindness she showed to everyone who entered her shop, regardless of their ability to pay. She had not forgotten where she had come from, and it showed in how she treated others. For her part, Theresa seemed equally interested in Jake's world. She asked endless questions about ranching, about the horses, about reading the weather and the land. When he described the sunrise over the mountains or the satisfaction of a successful cattle drive, she listened with genuine fascination. "Take me there," she said one Sunday in early autumn. "To the ranch. I want to see where you live, what you do." Jake hesitated. The ranch was his refuge, the one place that was entirely his. Bringing Theresa there felt significant, like crossing a line from which there would be no going back. But when he looked at her eager face, he found he wanted to share that part of his life with her. "Next Sunday," he promised. "I will come get you early, and we will spend the day at Silver Creek." That next Sunday dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather. Jake arrived at the boarding house just after sunrise, driving a small wagon instead of riding alone. Theresa was waiting for him, dressed practically in a simple cotton dress and sturdy boots, her hair braided down her back. The ride to the ranch took about an hour, and they spent it in comfortable conversation. Jake pointed out landmarks, the creek where he had learned to fish, the stand of cottonwoods where he sometimes went to think. Theresa told him about a letter she had received from San Francisco, about how well the shops were doing even in her absence. When they arrived at Silver Creek, Samuel came out to meet them, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile when he saw Theresa. "So this is the famous Miss Cole," he said, helping her down from the wagon. "Jake has told me a good deal about you." "Has he?" Theresa said, shooting Jake an amused look. "I hope it was all good." "Good enough that he has been practically useless on Sundays, thinking about getting into town to see you," Samuel replied, and Jake felt his ears burn. "But I reckon a man is allowed to be a fool when he is courting." Samuel gave them a tour of the ranch, showing Theresa the stables, the corrals, the main house where he lived, and the bunkhouse where Jake and the other hands stayed. She asked intelligent questions about the horses' care, about the cattle operation, about water rights and grazing land. Jake could see Samuel warming to her, impressed by her genuine interest and quick understanding. After lunch, Jake took Theresa riding. He put her on Sage, his gentlest mare, and was pleasantly surprised to discover she had a natural seat. They rode out to his favorite spot, a small rise that overlooked the valley. From here, you could see for miles, the land rolling away in shades of gold and brown and green, the mountains purple in the distance. "It is beautiful," Theresa breathed, taking in the view. "I can see why you love it here." "It gets in your blood," Jake agreed. "The space, the freedom. In San Francisco, there are people everywhere, buildings blocking the sky. Here you can breathe." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the clouds drift past. Then Theresa spoke, her voice soft but serious. "Jake, I need to tell you something, about how I ended up on that street where you found me." Jake turned to look at her. In all their conversations, she had never explained what had brought her to such desperate circumstances. He had not pushed, figuring she would tell him when she was ready. "My parents died when I was 17, Theresa began, her eyes on the distant mountains. "Cholera. It swept through our town in Kansas, took half the population in a month. I had no other family, no money, nothing. The bank took our farm to settle debts I did not even know my father had." She took a shaky breath. "There was a man in town, Mr. Winters, who offered to help me, said he would give me a job in his store, provide room and board. I was so desperate, so grateful that I did not question it. I should have." Jake felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. He thought he knew where this story was going. "He wanted more than work from me," Theresa said quietly. "And when I refused, he threw me out, told everyone in town I was a thief, that I had stolen from him. No one would hire me, no one would help me. So I started walking, thinking I could find work in another town, but I had no money, no food, and I was not strong enough for the journey." She looked at Jake then, her green eyes shining with unshed tears. "I ended up in Reno more dead than alive, and I had given up. I was ready to die, Jake. And then you came along and reminded me that the world still had good people in it, that I deserved to live." Jake reached out and took her hand, squeezing gently. "I am sorry you went through that. No one should have to endure such things." "I am not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me," Theresa said firmly. "I am telling you because I want you to know all of me, the broken parts, the shameful parts, the scared parts. If we are going to build something together, it needs to be on a foundation of honesty." "Thank you for trusting me with this," Jake said. "And for what it is worth, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You survived. You built a life. That takes more courage than most people ever have to find." Theresa wiped at her eyes and offered him a watery smile. "See, this is why I love you. You always say exactly the right thing." The words hung in the air between them. Love. She had said it before, that first day in the wedding dress, but this felt different. More real, more grounded in actual knowledge of each other. "I am falling in love with you too," Jake said, the words coming easier than he expected. "I think I have been for a while now. I was just too stubborn to admit it." Theresa laughed, the sound bright and free. Then she leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet, and Jake felt the last of his reservations crumble. This was right. She was right. They were right together. When they returned to the ranch that evening, Samuel took one look at their faces and nodded knowingly. "I reckon I will be losing my best hand soon," he said, but he was smiling. "Not losing," Jake corrected. "Just gaining a partner who will actually have a reason to stick around permanent like." As Jake drove Theresa back to town in the fading light, they made plans. A winter wedding, they decided, after the fall work was done but before the worst of the cold set in. Small, just friends and people from the ranch and the shop. Theresa would move to the ranch after they married, and they would build a small house on the property, their own place to start their life together. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Jake's life. He worked hard at the ranch, saving money and helping Samuel prepare for the transition. Samuel had decided to sell Jake a full half of the ranch, making them true partners. It was more than Jake had ever dreamed of, and he knew he owed much of it to Samuel's faith in him. Theresa continued to run her shop, building up inventory and training her employees to handle more of the day-to-day operations. She would keep the shop after marriage. She and Jake had agreed, but hire a full-time manager so she could focus on the ranch and the life they would build together. They spent every possible moment together, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Jake discovered that Theresa sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs in a clear, pretty voice. Theresa learned that Jake was nearly useless before his morning coffee, and that he had a wicked sense of humor once you got past his quiet exterior. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Jake told her about the loneliness of being orphaned young, about the years of drifting before he found his place at the ranch. Theresa shared more stories from San Francisco, about the challenges of being a woman in business, about the friends who had supported her and the ones who had tried to take advantage. They also talked about the future: how many children they wanted, where they would build their house, what they would plant in the garden. They discussed the injustices they had witnessed, the poverty and desperation that had nearly destroyed Theresa, and how they might help others in similar circumstances. Perhaps a fund for women in difficult situations, Theresa suggested, or jobs at the shop for those who needed a fresh start. December came, cold and clear, and with it their wedding day. True to their plans, it was a small affair, held in the same church where Theresa had stood in her wedding dress that first day. She wore that same dress, carefully preserved, and Jake wore a new suit that she had tailored for him. Samuel stood as Jake's witness and Mrs. Patterson stood for Theresa. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked Jake if he took Theresa to be his wife, his "I do" rang out strong and clear. When Theresa was asked the same, her voice was steady and sure. "I do," she said, looking into Jake's eyes. "I absolutely do." They kissed to seal their vows, and the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. At the reception afterward, held at the restaurant where they had shared their first meal, Samuel stood and offered a toast. "I have known Jake O'Brien for near about 4 years now," he said, raising his glass. "And in that time, I have watched him become one of the finest men I have ever had the privilege to work with. He is honest, hardworking, and decent to his core. When I heard about him giving his last dollar to a stranger, I thought he was a fool. But now, seeing him married to that same stranger, who has become a remarkable woman, I think he might be the smartest man in Nevada. To Jake and Theresa, may your love be as enduring as this hard land we call home." They spent their wedding night at the boarding house, in a room Mrs. Patterson had decorated with flowers and candles. It was sweet and tender and everything a wedding night should be. Two people who had found each other against all odds finally coming together completely. The next morning, they loaded Theresa's belongings into a wagon and made the journey to Silver Creek Ranch, to the small house that Jake and the other ranch hands had built over the past month. It was simple but sturdy, 2 rooms to start with space to add on as their family grew. Theresa had furnished it with pieces from her apartment in San Francisco and items she had purchased in Reno, making it cozy and welcoming. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment. Theresa had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and physical labor, the way weather and seasons dictated everything. Jake had to learn to share his space, to consider someone else in his decisions, to open up emotionally in ways he had never done before. But they worked at it, both of them committed to making their marriage strong. Theresa learned to ride properly and started helping with some of the ranch work, particularly the bookkeeping, which she had a natural talent for. Jake made efforts to understand her business, even traveling with her to San Francisco once to see the original dress shops and meet the people who worked for her. Spring came, and with it new life on the ranch. Foals were born, calves dropped, and the work intensified. Theresa threw herself into it, proving she was not afraid of hard work. She earned the respect of the ranch hands with her willingness to get dirty and her good humor, even when things went wrong. It was late summer when Theresa realized she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening after dinner as they sat on the porch of their little house watching the sun set. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, her hand on her still flat stomach. Jake turned to her, eyes wide. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "I have missed my monthly courses and I have been sick in the mornings. All the signs are there." Jake let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses, then pulled Theresa into his arms, gentler than usual, as if she were made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A baby? Are you happy?" Theresa asked, though she could clearly see he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jake said. "Terrified, excited, overwhelmed, but above all happy, so incredibly happy." They told Samuel the next day, and the older man actually teared up, insisting they celebrate properly. That Sunday, they announced the news to their friends in town, and the congratulations poured in. Theresa's pregnancy was not easy. She was sick for the first few months, could barely keep food down, and lost weight instead of gaining it. Jake worried constantly, but Theresa took it in stride. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I am strong, we will be fine," and she was right. By the 4th month, the sickness passed, and she began to bloom. Her skin glowed, her hair grew thick and lustrous, and her belly rounded with the growing life inside. She continued to work at the ranch and the shop, though Jake and everyone else tried to get her to slow down. "I am pregnant, not dying," she would say with exasperation. "I can still sew a straight seam and ride a horse." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1883 after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. Jake paced outside the bedroom where the doctor and Mrs. Patterson attended to Theresa, wearing a path in the floorboards. When he finally heard the baby's cry, thin and outraged, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You can come in now," Mrs. Patterson called, and Jake stumbled into the room. Theresa lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket she had sewn herself. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Jake approached slowly, almost afraid to look. Then Theresa pulled back the blanket and he saw his child for the first time. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shocking amount of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus on the world around him. "He is perfect," Jake breathed. "We need to name him," Theresa said. "I was thinking, if you approve, we could call him Samuel, after your partner and friend." Jake felt tears prick his eyes. "Samuel O'Brien, I like it. I like it very much." Little Samuel, or Sam as they called him, transformed their lives in ways they could never have anticipated. The sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the constant worry, but also the profound joy of watching this tiny person grow and change. Jake had never known he could love something so fiercely, so completely, until he held his son. Theresa took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. She nursed Sam herself, refusing to hire a wet nurse as many women of her means did. She kept him close, working in the shop with him sleeping in a basket nearby, riding around the ranch with him secured against her chest in a sling she designed. Samuel Sr., the ranch owner, was besotted with his namesake. He would come by their little house every evening to hold the baby, tell him stories about the ranch and the land. "This will all be yours someday," he would say. "Yours and your brothers and sisters, God willing." As Sam grew from infant to toddler, Jake and Theresa's life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Theresa's sharp business mind combined with Jake's practical ranching knowledge made them a formidable team. They expanded the herd, improved the grazing lands, and built a reputation for quality horses that spread throughout Nevada and beyond. The dress shop in Reno continued to do well, and Theresa opened a second location in Carson City. She split her time between the ranch and the shops, and Jake sometimes teased her about being a business magnate. But he was proud of her success, proud of how she had built something lasting from nothing. When Sam was 2, Theresa became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and their daughter was born on a beautiful spring morning in 1885. They named her Grace, and she was the image of her mother, with the same green eyes and delicate features. Jake thought his heart might burst from loving his family so much. To come home after a long day and find Theresa reading to the children, or to watch Sam toddle after him around the ranch trying to mimic everything he did, or to have Grace fall asleep on his chest. Tiny and trusting, these moments felt like gifts he had never expected to receive. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle, dry summers when water was scarce, financial worries and close calls. But they faced everything together, and their love only deepened with each challenge overcome. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jake and Theresa took a rare evening to themselves. Samuel Sr. insisted on watching the children, and they rode out to the rise where Jake had first told Theresa he was falling in love with her. They sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Theresa leaning against Jake's shoulder. "You ever think about that day?" Jake asked. "The day I gave you the $1 all the time," Theresa admitted. "It was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life, all at once. The worst because of what I had become, what I had lost. The best because it was the day I met you, even though I did not know then what you would come to mean to me." "I think about it too," Jake said. "About how close I came to walking past you, to deciding I needed that $1 more than you did. My whole life would be different if I had made that choice." "But you did not," Theresa pointed out. "You chose kindness. You chose to help. That is who you are, Jake O'Brien. That is why I love you." Jake kissed the top of her head. "And you chose to survive, to fight, to build a life worth living. That is who you are, Theresa O'Brien. That is why I love you." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and content. Then Theresa spoke again. "I want to do something," she said. "Something to help other women who are where I was. I have been thinking about this for a while, and I think I know how." "Tell me," Jake encouraged. "I want to start a fund like we talked about years ago, money to help women in desperate situations. Food, shelter, training for work, whatever they need to get back on their feet. And I want to create jobs, real jobs with fair pay at the shops and maybe even here at the ranch." She turned to look at him. "I know it will cost money, and I know not everyone will approve. People can be judgmental about women in difficult circumstances. But I cannot forget what it felt like to be hopeless. If we can help even a few women avoid that fate, it will be worth it." Jake smiled. "I think it is a wonderful idea, and we have the means to do it. Let us make it happen." They spent the next several months setting up what they called the Second Chance Fund. In honor of the second chance Jake had given Theresa all those years ago. Theresa contributed money from her business profits, and Jake added funds from the ranch. They enlisted Mrs. Patterson, and several other women in town to help identify women in need and administer the aid. The fund started small, helping a widow with 3 children pay her rent, providing job training to a young woman who had been abandoned by her family. But word spread, and soon they were helping women from all over western Nevada. Some came to work in Theresa's shops, learning the dressmaking trade. Others found positions at the ranch or with families in town who needed household help. Not everyone approved, as Theresa had predicted. There were those who whispered that the O'Briens were encouraging immorality, that they were wasting their money on women of questionable character. But Jake and Theresa held firm, knowing the good they were doing was more important than public opinion. The years passed, marked by the growth of their children and the steady success of their endeavors. Sam grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and spent every moment he could with his father, learning about horses and cattle. Grace was more like her mother, creative and business-minded, fascinated by the dress shops and already designing her own clothes at age 5. In 1888, Theresa gave birth to their 3rd child, another boy they named Thomas. He was a happy, easy baby, and his arrival felt like a confirmation of all the blessings in their life. Samuel Sr. passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1889, and the ranch became fully Jake's. It was bittersweet, inheriting the land he loved but losing the man who had been like a father to him. They buried Samuel on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Jake made sure to visit the grave regularly with his son, telling young Sam stories about the man he was named for. As the 1880s gave way to the 1890s, Jake and Theresa's life became something they had never quite imagined possible. The ranch was prosperous, the businesses were thriving, their children were healthy and happy. They had built something lasting, something good, from the ashes of their difficult pasts. One evening, as they celebrated Jake's 40th birthday with their family and friends, Jake found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. From an orphaned boy to a struggling ranch hand to a successful rancher and businessman, husband and father. And all of it had changed because he had chosen to give his last dollar to a homeless girl. As if reading his thoughts, Theresa raised her glass. "A toast," she said, and the room quieted. "To my husband, Jake O'Brien, the kindest, most generous man I have ever known. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never be loved, and a family beyond my wildest dreams. Everything good in my life started with you." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "And everything good in my life started when you came back," he replied. "When you showed me that one small act of kindness could ripple out in ways I never imagined. I love you, Theresa. Today, tomorrow, and always." Their guests cheered and clinked their glasses, but Jake only had eyes for his wife. She smiled at him across the table, that same smile that had captured his heart on a bench outside the general store all those years ago, and he felt the same surge of love and gratitude he always felt when he looked at her. The children grew, and with them, the legacy Jake and Theresa were building. Sam, at 10, was already helping significantly with ranch work, showing a natural talent for training horses. Grace, at 8, had begun designing dresses that her mother actually used in the shops, her creative eye already sophisticated beyond her years. Thomas, the baby at 5, was the comedian of the family, keeping everyone laughing with his antics and observations. In 1893, Jake and Theresa celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together everyone whose lives they had touched. The women helped by the Second Chance Fund, the employees of the dress shops, the ranch hands, the business associates from as far away as San Francisco. It was a testament to the connections they had built, the lives they had changed. During the party, One of the women who had been helped by the fund stood to speak. Her name was Margaret, and she had come to them 2 years earlier, pregnant and alone, cast out by her family. The fund had provided her with shelter and job training, and she now worked as a seamstress in the Carson City shop. "I want to thank Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien," Margaret said, her voice shaking slightly. "Not just for the money or the job, but for treating me like I mattered, like I was worth saving. You gave me my life back, and I will spend the rest of my days trying to pay that forward." There were tears in Theresa's eyes as Margaret sat down. "That is what it is all about," she whispered to Jake. "That is why we do this." As the 1890s progressed, the O'Brien family continued to flourish. The ranch expanded its operations, and Jake brought in new breeding stock that improved the quality of their horses. Theresa's dress shops became a small empire, with locations now in 5 Nevada towns and 2 in California. But they never lost sight of what mattered most: each other, their children, and helping those in need. The children grew into teenagers, each developing their own personalities and interests. Sam, tall and serious like his father, declared his intention to take over the ranch someday. Grace, beautiful and artistic like her mother, wanted to expand the dress business into ready-made clothing for working women. Thomas, charming and clever, talked about becoming a lawyer, wanting to help people in a different way than his parents did. Jake and Theresa supported all their children's dreams, knowing that the security and opportunities they enjoyed were gifts not everyone received. They made sure the children understood their privilege, involving them in the Second Chance Fund work, and teaching them the value of kindness and generosity. In 1898, on a summer evening much like the one when they first met, Jake and Theresa sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. The little 2-room house had been expanded over the years into a comfortable family home, but they had kept the original rooms, the ones they had started their marriage in, as a reminder of where they had come from. "You ever wish things had been different?" Jake asked, a question that had been on his mind lately. "That you had not gone through what you went through, that we had met some other way." Theresa considered this seriously before answering. "I wish I had not suffered as I did. I wish I had not lost my parents, had not been taken advantage of, had not known such desperation. But would I trade the journey if it meant not ending up here with you, with our children, with this life we have built? No, never." She took his hand. "Everything I went through made me who I am. It taught me compassion, resilience, gratitude, and it brought me to you. I would go through it all again if this was the destination." Jake squeezed her hand. "I love you," he said simply. "More now than even on our wedding day, and I loved you powerfully then." "And I love you," Theresa replied. "My cowboy who gave away his last dollar. My partner, my love, my home." As the sun set over the Nevada landscape, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Jake felt a deep sense of peace. His life had not been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But he had Theresa by his side, their children thriving, a legacy of kindness spreading through the work they did. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Sam did indeed take over much of the ranch operations, showing a gift for the work that made Jake proud every single day. He married a lovely young woman named Catherine in 1900, and they gave Jake and Theresa their first grandchild in 1901, a boy they named Jake Jr. Holding his grandson for the first time, feeling the weight of this new generation, Jake was overcome with emotion. "Your great-grandfather Samuel would have loved to meet you," he whispered to the baby. "And your grandmother and I are going to spoil you terribly." Grace revolutionized the family business, introducing ready-made clothing lines that made fashionable dresses affordable for working women. Her designs were practical yet beautiful, and they flew off the shelves. She married a businessman from San Francisco in 1902, a kind man who supported her ambitions and treated her as an equal partner. Thomas did become a lawyer, and true to his nature, he focused on helping those who could not afford legal representation. He set up a practice in Reno, often working with the Second Chance Fund to help women navigate legal issues around property, divorce, and children's rights. As Jake and Theresa entered their 50s, they began to slow down slightly, letting their children take on more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch and businesses. But they never stopped being active in the Second Chance Fund, never stopped looking for ways to help others. In 1905, on what would have been their 22nd wedding anniversary, Theresa surprised Jake with a trip to the spot where he had first found her all those years ago. The building was still there, though much had changed around it. Reno had grown into a proper city, the dusty streets now paved, the ramshackle buildings replaced with brick and stone. "I wanted to come back here," Theresa explained as they stood in front of the old building, "to remember where I was and to be grateful for where I am. Sometimes I think I dreamed it all, that this life is too good to be real. But then I look at you, and I know it is all true." Jake pulled her close. "You made it real. You took the smallest bit of hope and turned it into all of this. I was just lucky enough to be part of the journey." "We were both lucky," Theresa corrected. "Lucky to have found each other, lucky to have recognized what we had, lucky to have built something lasting." They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against impossible odds, remembering the past and grateful for the present. The homeless girl and the cowboy with his last dollar, now prosperous and loved and surrounded by family. As they turned to leave, heading back to the life they had built together, Theresa paused. A young woman sat huddled against a building across the street, thin and dirty and desperate looking. Without a word, Theresa walked over and pressed several dollars into the woman's hand, along with a card for the Second Chance Fund. "There is help if you want it," Theresa said gently. "You do not have to do this alone." The woman stared at the money and the card with the same expression Theresa must have worn all those years ago. Hope, disbelief, desperate gratitude all mixed together. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "Thank you so much." As Jake and Theresa walked away, Jake felt a swell of love for his wife so strong it almost hurt. This was who she was, who she would always be. Someone who remembered, who cared, who helped. He had given away $1 27 years ago, and in return, he had received a lifetime of love and purpose. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren arrived, the ranch and businesses continued to prosper, and the Second Chance Fund helped hundreds of women build new lives. Jake and Theresa grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces lining with age, but their love never diminishing. In 1910, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children's spouses, and their 6 grandchildren. It was a noisy, chaotic, beautiful gathering, full of laughter and love. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Jake and Theresa sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. "We did good," Jake said, looking out over the ranch that had been his life's work. "Didn't we?" "We did very good," Theresa agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "I would do it all again," Jake said. "Every hard day, every struggle, everything, because it led me to you." Theresa leaned her head on his shoulder. "And I would walk every painful mile again if you were waiting at the end of it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out one by one over the Nevada sky. Two people who had started with nothing but a single dollar and a desperate hope, who had built an empire of love and family and kindness. The cowboy who had given everything away and the homeless girl who had returned in a wedding dress, now old and comfortable and deeply, profoundly blessed. Their story was not one of dramatic adventure or grand gestures, though it had started with both. It was a story of steady love, of commitment, of choosing each other every single day. It was a story of kindness rippling outward, changing lives in ways both big and small. It was a story of two broken people who had found wholeness in each other. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside, hand in hand as they had been for nearly 3 decades. Their house was quiet now, the children grown and gone to their own homes. But it was full of memories, full of love, full of the life they had built together. Jake helped Theresa into bed, a ritual they had perfected over the years. They lay facing each other in the darkness as they had done countless times before. "I love you, Jake O'Brien," Theresa whispered. "I love you, Theresa O'Brien," Jake replied. And in the morning, they would wake and do it all again, loving each other through another day in the life they had built from nothing but a silver dollar and impossible hope.